Hi, and welcome to our first episode of Crime Unfolded podcast. Before we start, if you like this kind of content, please hit that subscribe button so you make sure to never miss our latest videos. Our story is about a 36-year-old woman suddenly went missing without a trace. For 4 months the police had no leads until they received an anonymous letter informing them that her body was in a public bathroom. When police arrived, they only found her severed head on a toilet tank lid. Chen Wanting was born in 1976 and lived in Sanchong, Taiwan. She was described as having a pure and sweet appearance, and she had a fondness for singing and dancing, with her parents wanting to groom her. During her school years, she was highly regarded by her classmates and teachers. At age 18, she married her first boyfriend and soon gave birth to a child, which completely uprooted her life plans and led to her abandonment. The tragedies in Wanting's life would only continue to build up. For years after marriage, her husband suddenly had an affair, and once this was discovered, he kicked Wanting out of the house and took custody of their child, with her father passing away around the same time. The death of their father also caused all but one of her siblings to turn on her. All of this crashing down on her at once was too much for Wanting, who attempted to take her own life. She was found not long after and rushed to hospital. Wanting recovered and was released from the hospital, but with permanent brain and mental damage. The few friends Wanting had were not looking out for her best interests, and under their influence and pressure, Wanting soon developed a drug and smoking habit. Due to all of these factors, Wanting was unable to find any work and had to live off a small disability payment of 3,000 Taiwan dollars. She lived in an apartment building with her brother, 37-year-old Chen Jiafu, who was the only one not resenting her over their father's death. But Jiafu was only barely scraping by himself and regularly had to borrow an additional 1,400 Taiwan dollars from their mother Chiu Yume. The money made was not enough to support one person. What more for two living in a single house? Wanting would often be found wandering the streets, begging local market vendors to give her leftover vegetables no one bought, and even went to her neighbor's house to beg for cigarettes. Jiafu often complained to his sister about this behavior, which led to numerous fights and arguments. It got to the point where Wanting would resort to prostitution and attempt to solicit taxi drivers. Jiafu caught her in the act numerous times, as she would often not return home many nights. On December 12, 2012, Yume, their mother, received a phone call from Jiafu, who sounded very upset. Jiafu told his mother that Wanting had gone missing. Yume told him she'd head to Sanchong as soon as possible. When she arrived on December 13th, there was still no trace of Wanting. She stayed to help look for her alongside Jiafu, with them searching the various markets and parks, only to find no trace of her. Due to a lack of success, she returned to Keelung. She returned to Sanchong again on December 15th, after Wanting still failed to turn up. She made another return trip to Keelung in order to help her other daughter run her business. On December 17th, for the third time, she went to Sanchong and together with Jiafu, reported Wanting's disappearance to the police. After receiving the report, the police began investigating, but without any witness statements. The long gap between the disappearance and the report, and not even knowing her last known whereabouts, meant that the investigation stalled immediately and saw no progress. All the police managed to do was reconstruct Wanting's last moments before her disappearance. The exact address didn't exist, and even if it did, the postal stamp revealed that the letter was sent from Taipei. The police also wondered how Wanting would have made it to Jiaoyi when she was destitute and Jiaoyi was over 250 kilometers away, and a 2.5-hour drive. And lastly, no cause of death was included, and the exact location of the body was detailed, but the police were informed via letter, and if they, a stranger living in a different county, stumbled upon the body, how would they know her identity? The police believed the letter to be a prank, but informed their counterparts in Jiaoyi. After receiving the letter, the police in Jiaoyi rushed to the address mentioned in the letter, which happened to be a part of the Shantian temple. After a quick search, the police found no body, and didn't detect any odors or foul smells either. Once they entered the restroom, one of the first things they noticed was a black handbag resting on top of a toilet tank lid. When the police lifted the bag, the first thing they noticed was how heavy it was. After setting it down, they opened the bag and the first thing they noticed was a smaller white handbag, and inside that handbag was an object, bound and wrapped in plastic. Next to the unknown object was a piece of paper with the following written on it: Identity, Sanchong, Chen Wanting. This clearly wasn't Wanting's complete body and didn't seem to be written or in the condition expected of someone who wanted burial but couldn't afford it. The police feared that the letter may have been a trap, and hurriedly pulled back from the scene, evacuated nearby areas and called in a bomb squad. The bomb squad quickly determined that there were no bombs or explosive devices in the bag, and let the police back in to investigate. It turned out that the object in that bag was wrapped in several layers. The outermost layer was a white opaque plastic bag from 7-Eleven. The second layer was a red striped transparent plastic bag. The third and fourth layers were two more white opaque plastic bags from 7-Eleven. The fifth layer was a black lady's jacket. The sixth layer was a white opaque plastic woven bag. The seventh layer was a pair of beach shorts. The eighth layer was a blue and white striped ladies' underwear. The ninth layer was a dark-colored round-neck short top. After opening this top, there was about 1 to 2 centimeters of salt inside. With each layer, the police removed the worse and more horrid the odor got. After removing the layer of salt, the police were greeted by the shriveled and swollen severed head of a woman. A depiction of the crime scene. The head was brought to the morgue for an autopsy, while the Jiaoyi police informed the police in Sanchong, Taiwan, who quickly arranged for Wanting's mother to visit Jiaoyi and identify the head. While that was being arranged, the police spent the entire night conducting a thorough search of the entire area, but failed to locate any other remains. Once Yumei arrived, she identified the jacket and other clothing used to conceal the head, and later the head itself. The head was missing the same front teeth as Wanting, but the face was so swollen that DNA testing was required. The DNA results came back positive, and the head was identified as Wanting. Lastly, the underwear wrapped around the head was also examined by forensics, who uncovered semen samples. At the morgue, the pathologist made the following observations to the head. There were no signs of bleeding or any blunt force trauma to the head. Based on the bleeding and wounds, it was determined that the decapitation, which was at the neck, happened post-mortem, and with a sharp instrument, likely by someone experienced such as a surgeon or butcher. The dismemberment likely happened very quickly after death, based on fractures to the highway bone and wounds to the neck. Wanting was likely strangled to death. And lastly, the skin on the head lost elasticity and showed signs of being in a freezer. In conclusion, the pathologist concluded that Wanting's cause of death was strangulation and that her remains were likely dismembered 30 minutes after death with a large blade. And then her remains, or at least just her head, were preserved and kept in a freezer. Based on the semen samples extracted from the underwear, police focused their investigation on Wanting's clients from her prostitution. They began investigating the circumstances behind her disappearance yet again. Wanting didn't have a mobile phone, except for when she was outside, which meant her clients would call the landline to her in Jiafu's home to ask her for a meeting. This is another reason Jiafu didn't like what she was doing. They decided to pull phone records and investigate their landline to find out who Wanting's last client was. Only, something was off. From the morning of December 9th to the evening of December 13th, there were 0 calls to the home's landline. The most recent call was from one of her regular customers, a man named Su Yoli. The police investigated Yoli and found that the two checked into a hotel on December 9th. The police tracked Yoli down and questioned him. He said that after picking Wanting up from Jiafu's home, they went to a hotel for intercourse. After they were finished, Wanting walked home, and that was the last time he ever saw of her. Yoli told police that she was wearing the same blue and white underwear used to conceal her head. The semen samples on the underwear also belonged to Yoli, and guest logs confirmed that he and Wanting stayed at a hotel. Although nothing indicated that Yoli was lying, and he did have an alibi, that would mean that Wanting wore the same semen-stained underwear from the 9th to 11th without changing. Assuming Jiafu was telling the truth about seeing her last on the 11th. Now suspicious about her brother, the police brought Jiafu in for questioning on March 17th. Police became suspicious of Jiafu because the note delivered to the police and the second note inside the handbag matched his handwriting. Jiafu worked as a chef at the Kafuku Buffet restaurant for 4 years. He was the head chef and butcher, which meant he had knowledge on dismemberment, dissection, and access to the necessary tools. According to their employment records, Jiafu was not at work that day. In fact, from December 9th to December 11th, he wasn't working at all. From 2003 to 2007, and from April 2011 to November 14, 2012, he purchased 5 life insurance policies for Wanting. Jiafu had been losing money rapidly, and had to spend a lot of money for his marriage to his wife Lu Miao. He also needed to pay for her entry to Taiwan, as she resided in China's Fujian province. She lived with him for a few months, before leaving back to China for a funeral, with the police receiving the letter soon after. Jiafu served in the ROC Army in Jiayi earlier in his life. The public restroom is 30 kilometers away from the base he served at, meaning he'd have knowledge of the dumping site. Chen Wanting was not her birth name. Originally she was known as Chen Shuhui, and did not tell her friends or clients her real name. Any acquaintances outside of the family only knew her by the given name Shuhui. If she was identified by Wanting, the letter would have had to have been written by a family member. Investigators believed that the killer was a close relative, with Jiafu being the most likely suspect. According to police, Jiafu had likely reached his breaking point, with how angered his sister's behavior made him, so he murdered Wanting and tried to collect on the life insurance to pay off his various debts. The money was also needed. This also served as a motive for murder, since police thought he would have wanted to hide in his view for his sister's shameful behavior from his fiancée. As for why he told police where to find Wanting's head. Under Taiwanese law, the insurance companies wouldn't pay until 7 years after she went missing, and 3 policies already lapsed due to non-payment, with 2 more on the verge of expiring too. After Jiafu's arrest, the police searched their residence, but failed to find any bloodstains or the rest of Wanting's remains. They took several knives from the kitchen, but no traces of blood were detected on any of them. What police did find was a gray motorcycle helmet, which was of interest. On March 13th at 4:30 a.m., a man wearing that same helmet and carrying 2 black plastic bags, similar to those used to conceal Wanting's head, was seen on CCTV cameras boarding a white motorcycle and driving in the direction of Jiayi. Unfortunately, this man couldn't be fully traced. Jiafu denied all involvement and told police that he wasn't the man in the CCTV footage. That helmet was fairly common, and he told police that on March 13th, he went to a nearby market to buy groceries, and then right back home where he stayed for the remainder of the day. The life insurance policies were mutual, and Wanting accompanied him to the signing of the policies, and those present said there were no signs of coercion. He also claimed to have an alibi on December 9th to 13th, and later March 12th to 13th. Jiafu failed to convince the police, and they continued monitoring the CCTV footage throughout Jiayi to try and find any evidence of Jiafu dumping the body. On March 13th, between 4:33 a.m. and 4:36 a.m., a man, dressed in a gray helmet, a beige long-sleeved shirt, dark pants, carrying a dark shoulder bag, and wearing white flip-flops, walked into a parking lot, carrying 2 black plastic bags, and boarded a motorcycle before driving off. The police continued following until it parked with the rider taking off his helmet to reveal the fact that he had curly black hair. He then retrieved a white plastic bag from one of the black plastic bags on the motorcycle's footrest and soon entered and began walking a pedestrian sidewalk. This man later crossed a pedestrian crossing and kept walking until he reached a rail station in Taipei. He is now dressed in a gray down jacket, a wig, sunglasses, blue jeans, and still carrying the plastic bags. The CCTV at Jiayi's rail station showed the man arriving and later walking for 20 minutes before boarding a taxi which took him to a supermarket. Rather than entering the store, he instead kept walking for 30 minutes until he was picked up by the Shangtian Temple's CCTV camera. There were no cameras in the restroom, and there was a blind spot on the way there, but the cameras, once they picked him up, again showed him walking away from the temple without the bags. He found another blind spot, and the cameras were unable to track his route, but he did, hours later, arrive at Taipei Station again. The station's cameras showed him walking to a loading room on a lower level of the subway system. Once there, he disposed of the backpack, jacket, sneakers, sunglasses, and other items into a garbage bin, which was later collected by a garbage truck. These items were never found or recovered. With all of these removed, the man's appearance now was a man with short hair, dressed in a beige long-sleeved shirt and white flip-flops, with a black shoulder bag instead of a backpack. He walked down the roads for a while, stopping to buy a raincoat before continuing. The last time the CCTV footage recorded this man was in the direction of Jiafu's home. The police were granted access to Jiafu's mobile phone records, and his phone signal was picked up in all the locations where this mystery man was spotted. Now armed with this knowledge, the police interrogated Jiafu yet again. Jiafu continued to deny any involvement and denied being the man in the CCTV footage. When asked why his phone signal appeared in the locations, he stopped talking to the police any further. Despite their strong suspicions, the police couldn't prove beyond doubt that Jiafu was the killer, and the rest of Wanting's remains were nowhere to be found, so the investigation stopped. That was until an unexpected witness came forward. The witness was Jiafu's fiancée and wife, Lu Miaomiao, who arrived in Taiwan on April 11th after being given a notice from Taiwanese authorities. When questioned, she told the police that she never saw Wanting, and when she asked Jiafu about it, she was told that Wanting had gone missing. When Miaomiao suggested that Jiafu report her disappearance to the police, he angrily snapped at her and warned her not to meddle. Jiafu also saw to it that the freezer was completely off limits and prevented Miaomiao from ever opening it. Later, a foul scent began to emanate throughout the apartment. When Miaomiao asked what it was, Jiafu said it was cigarette smoke from a street-level eatery. In January 2013, Jiafu purchased a large, opaque black plastic bag and placed it over a green medium-sized meat grinder. Miaomiao asked about it, and Jiafu said it was a leftover from his work at the restaurant. He claimed it hadn't been used for 2 years, and it was taking up space, so he thought it would be better to sell it. Miaomiao didn't believe him, as the meat grinder was spotless save for some rust, and showed no signs of disuse. She was suspicious, but didn't connect the meat grinder or the foul scent to Wanting's disappearance. The second witness was one of Jiafu's neighbors, who in December 2012 was suddenly awoken by a loud mechanical noise. She went to her bathroom to wash her face when she noticed 2 to 3 centimeters of filthy water covering her floor. Floating on the water surface were strange, foul-smelling pieces of flesh, the size of fingernails with a color resembling pig liver or pig kidney. She was clueless as to where these pieces came from, but got to work on cleaning. Whenever she cleaned up a piece, more would surface, with her realizing that they were coming from the floor's drainage hole. The apartment building had a shared pipeline on all floors, except the first, and the unit directly above hers, where Jiafu and Wanting resided, was vibrating and emitting machine sounds. She concluded that Jiafu made the mess, and asked her sister, who worked at a cleaning company, to bring some cleaning solution so she could finish cleaning up. By the time her sister arrived, the foul odor was gone. Hearing this testimony caused police to reach a horrific conclusion. If these testimonies are to be believed, then Jiafu had likely dismembered Wanting's body into smaller pieces, before running them through a meat grinder, and later flushing the remains down the toilet. From June 7th to 21st, the police conducted another thorough search of Jiafu's residence, with sniffer dogs helping in the search. Carefully hidden in a utility room, the police found a bloodstained knife, a rice cooker, bloodstains Wanting's wardrobe, enough that they can't be easily seen, and 2 gaps in the floor tiles and 2 weak bloodstains on the walls. Unfortunately, the meat grinder was nowhere to be found. According to Miaomiao, Jiafu had successfully sold it for 1,200 Taiwanese dollars. DNA samples were taken from the blood on the knife, and it was compared to the wounds on Wanting's neck. Both results came back a match. Wanting's DNA was also on the discarded rice cooker, and the bloodstains were found on the floor and walls. The police also got a clear view of the motorcycle's license plate, and it was registered under Yumei's name. The trial began near the end of 2013, and Jiafu pleaded not guilty, with he and his defense making the following arguments. It was stated that the two lived together, and finding Wanting's blood wasn't unusual, as she would often walk around naked inside the home, with them explaining the bloodstains away as being menstrual blood. They also alleged that the search of his home was improper, and that some evidence was even planted, as the police failed to find this evidence during the first search. Everyone was made to stay on a lower story while they conducted their search. They stated that the blood on the kitchen knife was just a coincidence, and likely from Wanting cutting herself by mistake, since the question of why the knife wasn't disposed, if it was the murder weapon, ended up being raised. The testimony of Jiafu's lower neighbor, underneath his apartment, was also questioned, since it was never proven that the pieces of meat or flesh belonged to Wanting, or that this story was even real to begin with. There was no evidence that the meat grinder was used, and the defense of Jiafu say that Miao Miao made the story up, so she could use Wanting's murder as grounds to file for divorce. And lastly, they questioned how accurate Yumei's identification of the man in the CCTV footage was. This objection was strengthened on January 22, 2014, when Yumei changed her testimony to say she was mistaken. In response, the prosecution refuted these arguments with the following. Those who knew Wanting stated that, although mentally impaired, she wasn't stupid and always wore clothing, and paid great attention to her hygiene. And even if she didn't, menstrual blood flows out slowly rather than splashing in large amounts, rendering that explanation groundless. They explained the search by saying that they didn't use the sniffer dogs at first, and the blood was too thin to see. The prosecutor also rejected the notion of Wanting accidentally cutting herself, as that knife before the murder had not been used for years. Wanting never cooked, and had to have others cook for her. Even if there weren't any other witnesses to his neighbor's story itself, people were still able to confirm it, based on other witnesses, such as her sister who was called to bring cleaning solutions to deal with the issue, and a lack of motive for her to lie. As for the meat grinder, Jiafu himself admitted that it existed, and was purchased from a hardware store. The police looked into the meat grinder, and it was the same one described by Miao Miao. And the meat grinder was known to have gone missing after her disappearance. Most damningly was in regards to Yumei's identification. Before the trial in early January, Jiafu had sent 2 letters to her mother, one of which read as, "The court will summon you as a witness in a few days. Please stop making mistakes. The judge will ask you to look at that footage, and then will ask you, who is the person with the black bag? Say it's not my son. If you don't, the judge will sentence me to death. Remember." And the second letter was, on the day of the court session on January 14th, the 2 women, referring to his neighbor and her sister, who live on the 2nd floor of our apartment, came to court and talked randomly and said some unfavorable things about me. In a few days, the judge will call you as a witness. Remember, the person holding the black bag in the picture is not me. If you say it is me, I will be sentenced to death. Despite what he had done, Yumei didn't want her son executed, so she did as instructed by the letters. And if there was still doubt left after the exposure of the letters, Miao Miao also identified the man as Jiafu. By now Jiafu had no defense, and the prosecution told the court what likely happened. They alleged that on December 9, 2012, angered by Wanting's phone call with her client Su Yili, he waited for Wanting to return home, and then strangled her once she arrived. 30 minutes later, he retrieved a kitchen knife, and began the post-mortem dismemberment of her body. He also used another knife, although this has never been found. Once he was done, he ran his sister's remains through a meat grinder, and drained the minced meat through the sewer, only her head which she kept in the freezer. On December 30th, Miao Miao arrived from China to live with him, which was unplanned, and made him worried that she'd find Wanting's head. He started by banning her from using the freezer, and later sprinkled salt across the head to perverse it. He finished by wrapping it up, in the aforementioned layers and hid it in the rice cooker to lay while he waited for a chance to dispose of the head. The wedding had taken a heavy toll on his finances, he struggled with living expenses, and the life insurance policies had already lapsed. So once Miao Miao returned to China for a funeral, he wasted no time in disposing of Wanting's head. On March 14th, he sent the letter to the police to make sure Wanting's head was found quickly so he could claim the life insurance. On June 30th, 2014, the Jiayi District Court found Chen Jiafu guilty of murder, fraud, and illegally disposing of a corpse. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, Jiafu was spared the death sentence. The leniency was given due to his lack of a prior criminal record and because her mother Qiu Yumei was the only family member of Wanting who had any involvement in her life, and she pleaded to the court to show mercy. The court listened and handed Jiafu a life sentence. Jiafu refused to accept this and appealed his verdict, claiming that Su Yili was the true killer and that he had been wrongfully convicted. On April 30th, 2015, Taiwan's High Court upheld the verdict and sentence. Although the judicial process was over, the police continued their investigation under the belief there may have been accomplices who helped dispose of the evidence and maybe even wrote the letter which would explain its flaws and typos. No accomplices were found. The letter was likely written with those mistakes to pretend he wasn't familiar with Wanting and used Wanting instead of Shuhui to make sure the police would find a person in their records. And lastly, the letter-writing process was likely rushed as he was running out of time since the last policy expired on March 18th. After the case reached the media, Jiafu's neighbors came forward, and what they had to say only made the case more disturbing and horrific than it already was. According to neighbors, Wanting often confided with them that Jiafu had kept coming on to her and trying to have incestuous sex with her, otherwise, he would not cook for her or get her cigarettes. It was also stated that Jiafu used to have his own addictions, which is where Wanting picked up hers from. And chillingly, Miao Miao said that as soon as she arrived in Taiwan, Jiafu took out 2 life insurance policies on her. The public restroom was swiftly demolished after the case, after many people posted staged videos of female voices saying, "I feel so much pain and don't touch me," to claim the site was haunted and gain online attention.